All right, so I'd like to start off by saying thank you everyone for coming. My name is Cody Armstrong, and of course we're going to be talking about how to use the Onshape app today, and how do we get work done using a mobile device and Onshape. So that's the goal for today. Going to be a short webinar. Really just going to focus on just the tips and tricks and how to get things done using the Onshape mobile app. As I always say with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. So if you have, the questions dialog there and you go to webinar control panel, feel free to type in any questions. I do my best from time to time to stop and make sure to address them. If I don't answer your question, stick around. I'll make sure at the end of the webinar to go back through and make sure that all are addressed. But again, ask any questions that you'd like. Now, for those new users out there, if you're just getting started with Onshape, there are a few things to keep in mind that I always like to point out at the beginning of webinars. And the first is our mission statement, and it very much ties into what we're talking about today. And that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And this includes mobile devices, which is, of course, what we're talking about here today. So if you haven't downloaded the Onshape app, either for Android or for your iOS device, I definitely recommend doing that. Of course, that's what we're going to be talking about today. But this also extends to other devices as well. So if Chromebooks is another good example. You can access your CAD data from Chromebooks, right, or from Linux machine or Mac or Windows. So really, accessibility from anywhere is the key here. So everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere you happen to be. And this also means collaboratively, right? The ability to work simultaneously on the same model, or the ability to work together, one user maybe on an iPad, another user maybe on his laptop, and be able to see the models update in real time. So that's our mission. Now, some other things I like to point out is we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, there's really three main pieces: parts, assemblies, and of course, drawings. Now, we can create parts, assemblies, and drawings. So we have all three major pieces there. Some things that are unique about Onshape, one for sure is the ability for us to update and evolve very quickly. Because we're a web-based platform, you're going to see updates and new functionality to Onshape roughly every 3 weeks, and you don't have to do anything. There's nothing for you to do on your end. You refresh the browser and you see new functionality being added. So you're going to see Onshape evolve very quickly. Some key things I always like to point out about Onshape: it has version control built in. So for those using a data management system or something to that effect to manage your files, with Onshape, all that functionality is built into the core. So there's no need for a separate data management system in many cases. The version control of Onshape has quite a robust version management capability. So version control is built in. Also, the ability to import and export common CAD formats. So if you're working with another CAD system, or if you're working with someone else that uses a different CAD system and you have the need to import and export, the standard and many even of the proprietary formats, we can. Step, IGES, Parasolid, SolidWorks Inventor, Creo, a number of different formats. I could go on, but we can read and write or import and export a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there today. The last thing I want to mention is entirely new methods of collaboration with Onshape. So if you're just getting started with Onshape, I definitely recommend sharing your document. You'll see a lot of the benefits of Onshape come in when you share. You'll see things update in real time. You communicate with each other via comments. You can see each other's screens with follow mode. So there's all kinds of cool stuff you can do once you've shared your document. So these are just some things I like to point out for all those new users out there just getting started, some things that really set us aside. Now, what are we going to talk about here today? The goal is really to tour the Onshape mobile interface. How do we work with Onshape mobile? Real simple. Build a basic part. We're going to go over some sketch basics, how to create simple, circles, lines, relations, those kinds of things. And then we're going to add it to an assembly, of course. So kind of a day in the life of an Onshape user, but maybe they only have their iPad or their Android phone, for instance, available. Quick question. Can I take apart an Onshape and open it in SolidWorks later? Yes, you can export Onshape parts, for instance, as SolidWorks parts, SLDPRT files. They will not carry over the sketches and features, and that's an important thing to point out, but you can export a native a SLD PRT file from Onshape. As I always mention with these, again, feel free to ask any questions. If you're having any issues with the audio, let me know. I know one user said that, so forgive me if we're having any audio issues. But that's what I'd like to cover here today. We're going to build a simple part, and then we're going to add it to an assembly. Real basic, but the idea here is kind of to cover how do I get around in the Onshape app? How do I get around and build a simple part? So let's dig in. Now, for this, I'm going to be using an iPad. But it's important to point out that almost everything I'm going to show you here today is almost identical in the Android app. So if you're using an Android tablet or an Android phone, just realize a lot of what I'm going to cover here today is universal. Although I'm showing an iPad, it could be, found in many times in the same places and the same functionality across both apps. So let's jump into it. Forgive me for just a second. I'm using, let's see, QuickTime here. Now, this is what you'll be greeted with the first time you log in to Onshape on your tablet or your phone, right? The documents page. And the idea behind it is it's a very similar interface to what you'd see in the web browser, right? So you logged in, the first thing you do, you tap Onshape, it takes you to the documents page, which is of course the same list of documents that you'd see in the browser, right? Just a list of all your different projects. And if I want to create a new one, you'll see in the bottom right here, a little plus icon right here. That's to create a new document, and you can even import documents from cloud storage services and even the local file storage, for instance, your pictures, into a document here as well. There's an import icon as well. So creating a document, you have filters. If I tap on the top left here, I have all the different filters for things like documents shared with me or documents in a team, public documents, tutorials, for example. So you have the same filters, again, that you'd see in the desktop. You have a search here, so you can search through documents. You have share options, account options. I'm not going to spend too much time on the documents page. But again, pretty straightforward. The idea being just to give you the same interface that you'd be seeing in the browser. Question. Is Onshape supported on Windows RT tablets? There is no Onshape specific Windows app. And that's a very good question. No Windows specific app. Now, we will run in a browser, but you won't get the touch interface, which means you can use, a lot of our users love the Surface Pro 3, for example, but they're running it through a browser like they would on a laptop. So the touch interface isn't there. There is not a specific Windows app. Okay, so moving on now. We've covered the documents page just in a brief overview, really just a list of your documents. To open one, of course, you can tap it and it will open that document. Some things I want to point out about the interface. It is a built interface specific to the app, right? So this is something that we've tailored to the device. And so you're going to see things scale and change depending on the resolution and so on. Some things I want to point out about general manipulation. First is rotate, pan, and zoom, of course, kind of key things when you're first getting started. Now, one thing I want to point out is you may have seen the orange dots appear on the screen. I have an option called Show Touches turned on just to show you where I'm touching the screen, and that's just meant to illustrate. You won't see those, but I put those on just so you can see what it is I'm trying to do. Okay, so some basics about rotate, pan, and of course, zoom. Now, rotate is a single finger drag, right? So if I single finger drag, I get rotate. Okay. Now, pan is a two finger drag. Right? So if I hold down two fingers and drag, I get pan. And of course, zoom is pinch to zoom. So much like zooming in on a photo, for example, you pinch to zoom, pinch in and out, zooms in and out. So very basic, but the idea behind it is, very familiar for those that are, used to other apps where, pinch to zoom is the way to manipulate, and even some photo apps have the two-finger drag to pan. Right? The key thing there, single finger drag, rotate, two-finger drag to pan, and pinch to zoom. Okay? So those are key things when you're first getting started manipulating the model. Now there's a lot of tips to give you here, but those are some key ones to know when you're getting started. Now, some bits about the interface. You have, again, trying to mimic the web browser in terms of the interface. So you have a documents menu in the top left here where you can close or change the units or create versions and so on. You have a versions and history menu here. You have collaborators list, right? So you can see your collaborators, who else is in the document with you. And actually, we announced the capability to see their screen. So you can actually double tap on a user's screen and see it in real time. Right? So just a little aside there. If you double tap on one of the collaborators, if someone's in your document, if you double tap their name, you can see their screen in real time. And that's called follow mode. Just a recent update. So we have our collaborators list. We also have comments. As I mentioned before, you can communicate with people. So here you see a list of comments. Is this good to go? I've added fillets. You can even highlight points on the model and communicate with people that you've worked with in the document. So a neat way to talk about different things in the part. Okay, so the last thing I want to mention is, of course, the help. Very useful for those just getting started. It is a mobile-specific help, which means you get mobile-specific tips. I'm not going to go into the detail on it now, but definitely worth checking out if you're just getting started. The help has lots of useful information, and it's, again, you're not filtering through a lot of the web browser stuff. It's specific to the mobile app. We even have integrated feedback tools and links to the videos and so on. But that's, again, very similar to what you might see in the web interface. And then we have the toolbar just below it. Again, the toolbar is context sensitive, so if I tap on an assembly tab here at the bottom, here's an assembly, and of course you'll see the toolbar has changed. So there are my mates and so on for building my assembly. So depends on where you are. You will have different things in your toolbar, but that's where you access, of course, all your different tools. Then you have your feature list, right? Again, if you've spent any time in the web browser, version of Onshape, very similar. It's just a history of everything you've done. You can move it in and out and resize it. You, of course, have your parts list here as well. One thing I want to point out is the ellipsis menu, where you have all the right-click options. So for those familiar with the right-click, where you have all these edit and rename and different options, that's what that ellipsis menu does. So you'll see the three dots. If you tap that, you get all those options. Okay. So that's your feature list, as I've already shown you just briefly. We also have tabs across the bottom. And I've mentioned them just a moment ago, but again, just like the browser interface, we have tabs that go across the bottom that allow you to go between the different elements of the document. So I have a Part Studio tab, my second Part Studio tab with all my different hydraulic components, and then the Assembly tab that contains them. Okay. So what I'd like to do, bear with me for just 1 second. What I'd like to do is, of course, build a part, and that's my goal here. I'm going to build you just a simple example of the finished swing arm, which is, of course, this part, right? Now, the idea behind it is not to show necessarily a complex model, but to show you what we can do very quickly. So let's get started. Now, just like the web app, I can select the Create tab menu in the bottom left corner here and create Part Studio. right? So I select Create Part Studio, and it creates a blank part. So again, just getting started, brand new part. We want to start modeling here. What I'd like to do now is, of course, start sketching. Now, the key thing with sketching, of course, is where do we want to start my sketch? Front, top, or right plane? So what I'd like to do is, in this case, start on the front plane. I can left tap the front plane, then tap the sketch icon in the toolbar. Okay. Now I'm in a sketch. You'll notice that the sketch toolbar changes. I see circles and rectangles and ellipses and so on. And now I can start sketching. Also notice I have a little sketch dialog here in the bottom right corner, and I can choose things like my constraints or even the plane that I've started on. Right, so you have all the options there as well as the option to confirm the sketch or to accept the sketch. One important thing that I want to point out here is, I've started this sketch. I just tapped the plane. I tapped the sketch icon, but I'm not normal to the plane. And there's one particular method I prefer to viewing normal to the sketch plane or rotating normal to the sketch plane. And that is the two-finger tap. Now, the two-finger tap is useful in a number of situations in the mobile app. So if I two-finger tap on the screen, you'll see the quick interface. So I have the option here to view normal to sketch plane. Again, very similar to the right click interface. So if I two-finger tap the screen, I get a flyout with common options. Right? In this case, view normal to sketch plane being one of them. So now that I'm in a sketch, I'm normal to the front plane, I can really start sketching. Now I have a list of sketch tools. As I mentioned, the toolbar is context sensitive, so I'm now in a sketch. I see all these different sketch tools. I can tap the circle, for instance. Okay? And if I hold down my finger, you'll see a little crosshair appear. So another big tip is what we refer to as the precision selector. So I tap the circle in this case. I want to draw a circle. And then I hold down my finger on the screen, just for more than a second or so, and you're going to see this little crosshair appear. Now I can move that crosshair over the origin, for example, and I'm attaching this circle to the origin. So this is how we precisely place things using the mobile app. Right? Let go, tap out an empty space, and now I have a circle that's constrained to the origin. And again, the idea there is to mimic what you might do in the browser, right? I want to be able to mouse over the origin and attach it. Well, in this case, I hold down my finger and then drag that crosshair over the origin, and then it attaches it. Okay. So we'll zoom out just a bit here and do that one more time. I'm still in the circle command. I hold down, call up the precision selector, move my cursor up. There it is. Let go. And tap a second circle. Right, so now I've drawn two circles, one on the origin, one just horizontal to the origin, and they are constrained that way because I used the precision selector. Now you can just start tapping circles in space, and some do and then decide to constrain it later. But realize that if you tap and hold, you get that precision selector where you can move over and very accurately select things. Okay, so I've got two simple circles, right? What I'd like to do next is add just a few dimensions to give these circles a size, right? So in the far right here, you'll see the dimension icon. I select dimension. I can tap the circle, then tap to place, right? So let's say this is 1. I get the dimension flyout. I tap 1 and the green check to accept, and the entire sketch scales to match that first dimension. Right? So now I can zoom in just a bit here and do that one more time. Tap the circle, place, and let's make this 0.625 green check. Okay. So again, very much like the web browser, you get the visual feedback as to the level of definition. So you'll see the circle on the left is black, the circle on the right is blue, indicating that it's underdefined, right? So I know that the circle on the left is attached to the origin, but I don't know the distance that the right circle is from there. So I'm going to tap the outside of the circle, tap the outside of the circle, and then you'll see the overall distance between them. Now, if you wanted the center points of the circles, you can tap those too. In my case, I want the overall distance of this part. So just simply tap the outside to outside, and that's the dimension that you get. Okay. So there we go. Now it's fully defined. So moving on, let's tap line. Notice that as I use the precision selector, I move my crosshair down over that circle, it highlights, indicating that it's attaching the line to the circle. Right? Let go. We'll attach it here. If I move it to just the right position, you'll see it actually snap to tangent. And there's my line. Right? So I have a line attached to both circles and tangent on one end. Now in my case, it's going to continue to draw a line. So if I tap out here, for instance, it's going to draw another line. If you don't want that, there's an undo that will undo, and then I can tap line again, and then, of course, draw my second line. Okay, so very simple. The idea behind it is you're using the precision selector almost as you would your cursor if you were holding a mouse, and it allows you to precisely select, here's exactly where I want to attach it, and you'll see I've created not just a coincident constraint, but also tangent constraints here as well, right? So it's snapping to these things automatically. Okay, so we've created a simple sketch, still not fully defined though, and I've shown you just a second ago how as we're doing this, a lot of these snaps automatically happen, but what happens if, for instance, I don't automatically get the constraint I want? I need to manually add a constraint. How does that process work? We'll get out of the line tool, just tap it here, and I need to manually add a constraint between the line here and the circle, right? So I just tap both entities, and there's a constraints flyout on the far right here, and you'll see the option for tangent. Right? So all you're really doing here is selecting the entities, just tapping the entities, and selecting the constraint type. So tap, tap, tangent. Okay, very simple, and it doesn't matter what the constraint is. So if I wanted to make two circles equal, I tap, tap, set them to equal. Right? Again, the same thing you'd be doing with a cursor in the browser. So we've got our sketch back to fully defined. I have one last thing I want to do to this. We're going to sketch a circle. Okay. Again, I'm going to use the precision selector, and we'll sketch two more circles on the inside of these two previous circles from before. We'll do, again, another dimension, 0.75 and 0.375. And now we have, again, a fully defined sketch. All I really did there is just add a few simple circles. So we've got this. We're ready to move on, ready to extrude and create a 3D model out of it. I'm going to go ahead and hit the check. One last thing I want to point out about this, the dialog here has all your constraints. You can left swipe and delete constraints from here as well. Okay. So I'm going to tap the check, and now we have our first sketch. Now I want to extrude. Tap extrude. Now I have a few options here. I can tap individual pieces of the sketch, or I can tap the entire sketch from the feature list. So it all depends on what you're trying to do. If I wanted, multiple parts here, if I needed multiple different extrusions, I might select different independent, contours within the sketch. In this case, I want the entire thing extruded. Okay. You also have the slider here, so you can grab and drag. Okay, so you can dynamically resize it. But of course, being more specific here, if I punch in a depth of 0.75. Okay. You have all the same options that you would in the browser. So I have in condition options. I have options to go different directions or reverse the direction, right? I have options for draft and second in position. So that's really it, though. I hit the check, and now I have it in extrude, right? A 3D solid model. Again, pretty straightforward. The key things there are just some tips about, things like two-finger tap menus and, the precision selector. Those are key things that if you know, it makes it much, much easier to use. All right, so let's move on to the next step. Now, as I mentioned before, the goal with this really is to build a part that looks like our finished swing arm of here. Now, of course, the finished swing arm has this angled cut, and so let's create that next. Now, for this, I'm going to create a sketch on the top plane, right? So tap the top plane. I can use the two-finger tap menu to start the sketch as well. So I don't have to go to the sketch menu in the toolbar, and then I can use two-finger tap menu, view normal to sketch plane, and now I'm in a sketch, normal to the sketch plane, and ready to start working. So let's start with a simple line. Again, I'll use that precision selector and constrain it to the origin. Notice I pick up that reference there. Okay. And we'll draw a line here, line here. Notice that I'm not getting an inference to that vertical point from earlier. You can move your precision selector over the point, then move it down, and it will wake up that inference or that reference, right? So you can attach to it. It makes it very easy to automatically constrain a point vertical to another without having to go back and do it later. Right? So just a tip, just again, very much like the web browser, you can wake up inferences of other geometry. So we've got a basic triangle, and of course our next step with this is to start to define some dimensions here. So I'm going to tap dimension, and we'll start adding a few dimensions to this thing. So just tapping between points, tap, tab. A same thing goes for an angle dimension. Tap the line. There's my angle dimension, which should be 20. Now, I can dimension the length of this triangle, but correct design intent entails that I attach it to the edge of the part. And you can do this a few different ways. One of the easiest is with the use command. So you'll see the use command in the toolbar right there, and it allows us to take a silhouette like this and convert it into sketch geometry. So you'll see I use the precision selector there, moved over the radius, and then let go, and it adds a line right at the silhouette of that arc. The neat thing about that is now you can attach those two, and you have a triangle that's attached to the end of your part, all right, the correct design intent. So, and just a tip, you have the use command. Again, the idea behind the Onshape apps is that they're full-fledged CAD editing tools and not just view tools or markup tools or something along those lines. So I've converted the edge. I attached my geometry to the edge. Now we're done. We're ready to create our cut. So we'll select extrude, and I'll tap the sketch. Now in this case, I don't want a new part, right? What I'd like is to remove. Notice that we put the sketch right at the center of the part. So what that means is I need a cut that goes both directions. So I'm going to choose through all in the first direction. Come down here, choose the second in position, and then choose through all for that in position as well. So now we're going both directions through all. Tap the check, and now I have my angled cut. Okay. So again, simple sketches, simple features. Spend a bit of time, learning the two-finger tap menu, the single-finger drag and hold, precision selector. Kind of those key things will go a long way in helping you to build models using the mobile app. Now, again, very similar workflows, for instance, for a fillet. So I can tap fillet, I can enter the radius size, tap an edge, right, and add a fillet. So very simple. Fillet, let's go around the outside here, 0.05. So, again, just tap the entity, tap, the value that you want and enter it. So that's the idea behind the mobile app. The key things to keep in mind are things like, the two-finger tap or the single-finger drag. Some things that I always want to point out with this is you can go back at any time and edit any of these. Right, edit, I can show the dimensions, I can suppress and roll back or delete them from this menu here as well. You also have hide show menus for the sketches. So here I have hide and show, where I can turn the sketches on and off. Right, I have options here like hidden edges visible, so different display style options as well with the model. So the idea again is just a full-blown CAD editing tool, not sacrificing in any way. So we've covered kind of the basics of building, your simple part. The one last thing that I wanted to do to this is create a simple shell where I can shell the bottom of this face with a 3/16 value. Okay. So now I've finished this and I'm ready to take it and assemble it. Right? I want to take this part and put it into my assembly and start using it. So some things I want to point out. Up to this point, it's largely been sketch tools and feature creation tools, right? You create your sketch, constrain it, dimension it, and so on, and then you create a basic feature out of it. When we talk about assemblies, what we're really talking about is motion. I want to be able to test the motion of my assembly, and that's really where we get into mates and all the various things that get involved with assemblies. But important thing to point out, if all you're doing is building, a static bunch of parts, for example, you can build parts together in a part studio. So it's an important thing to point out. Assemblies and Onshape are really about motion. In this case, you'll see I've modeled 3 parts of this hydraulic clamp together in the same part studio. So just realize that's an option as well. You can build as many parts in a single tab as you'd like. But assemblies are all about testing and fitting, motion, making sure I don't have collisions and things like that. So let's get into that. Now, I've already inserted a few parts. What I'd like to go over today is, inserting the part that we've built and then attaching the mate and then testing our motion out. So let's do that. Now, as I mentioned before, notice the toolbar's changed. So you'll see different mate icons. You'll see I've got rack and pinion relations and screw relations. Again, all the same things I'd expect to see in the browser. But I want to start just like I would in the browser with the insert parts command. Right? So I select insert parts, and then I get a list of all the different part studios or assemblies in my document. Right? So I can insert any one of them. I choose, in this case, the part we modeled, which is part 1. And I'll hit the check. Now you can move in a number of different ways, but the easiest is just to tap it and then drag the arrows. You can rotate using these same arrows. So it's a very easy way to manipulate the part. By the way, one big tip that I'd give is if you want to deselect something. So as I start tapping things, they maintain that selection. Double tapping clears any selections. So if you double tap in the graphic space, it will deselect anything that you have selected. So very useful tip, especially when you start talking about things like the relations we were talking about earlier, where I'm tapping a whole bunch of things to constrain them. It's easy to get it wrong. You can double tap and deselect and then all the entities. So I've inserted my part, and it's really just free floating around here. There is no constraints, so I can move it up and down and left and right, and there's really nothing holding it down. What I'd like to do is attach this finished arm to the top of my plunger here. Right now, this involves, essentially, in a traditional CAD application, maybe a combination of mates, something like 2 or 3 different mates, where maybe I align the bore to the boss and then I align 2 faces planar, something to that effect. With Onshape, we use just a bit of a different approach to mate. So if you haven't created a mate in Onshape, there's a lot of advantages, especially in scenarios like this, where I want to attach this arm to the top of the plunger, but it shouldn't be able to move at all relative to the plunger, right? It should be fixed atop it. Another example I'd like to use is imagine you're mating a bolt to a hole. You don't want the bolt to spin or move or in any way. With a traditional CAD application, that could be a combination of mates. With Onshape, it's one fasten mate, right? So I tap fasten, and what I'd like to do is attach the mate connector at the top of this arm to the mate connector at the top of the plunger. Now, if you haven't used or created a mate in Onshape yet, mate connectors are essentially points on your part. And what we're doing is we're taking a point from one part and a point from another part and bringing them together. And the degrees of freedom are defined by the type of mate that we choose. So in this case, a fasten mate locks the two together. It restricts all degrees of freedom. So again, this is another scenario where I'm going to use the precision selector. So I single finger drag and hold, and you'll see again, I get the precision selector pop up. Okay, and single finger drag and hold, I'll select the point on the top of the plunger. Again, just selecting a point from each part, and it brings them together. Right? I can define the mate type here in the dialog, so if I wanted to switch mates, I can. I can select the entities or deselect the entities here, mate connectors here, I should say. And I can set the clock, so if I wanted to rotate by 90-degree increments, I can do that as well. So you have the full set of options. I can accept the mate, and now if I wanted to test the motion out, tap the arm and drag it up, and you'll see that it's attached to that plunger. Right? It's not sliding up or down relative to it because it's attached to the end. The 2 points are fixed relative to each other. And that's just the fasten mate. So I can choose a different mate type, for example. If I wanted to choose, for instance, something like a revolute that allows it to rotate, I can do that. So definitely worth checking out all the different mate types if you haven't already. There's a lot of advantages to the Onshape method of mates, especially in scenarios like this where it would normally be a combination of mates. This can be done with a single fasten mate. Okay, so that's really what I had planned for you here today. Now, the big things that I want to point out, things like the 2-finger tap context menu, the single finger tap hold precision selector that allows you to highlight very precisely, double tapping to deselect. Those are the key things. If I had to make, a list of 3 or 4 things to take away from this, those would be the key things. They're going to make a huge difference in how efficient you are and how you can get around inside the Onshape app. Okay, so that is what I had planned. Bear with me for just a second. I have just one more thing going forward, and if you have any questions, again, feel free to ask them. Going forward, if you haven't already, try Onshape in your professional work and let us know what you think. We really encourage you to give us your feedback. There's a feedback mechanism built into the Onshape app. There's a feedback mechanism built into the web app, and it's a very easy thing to do. So we really encourage you to try Onshape in your professional work and let us know what you think. We'd really love to hear your feedback. Also, invite others and share. If you haven't shared your document yet and seen the real-time collaboration or the follow mode like I was showing you just a second ago, it's definitely worth checking out. There's some really impressive stuff there, and really cool when you start digging into it. The last thing I want to mention is if you're interested in establishing a user group, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you set it up and help you get things going. So let us know if you're interested in establishing a user group. So I'm going to stick around and answer any questions. So again, feel free to type them in the questions dialog and you go to webinar panel. But that's it, everyone. Thank you and have a good day.